Tonight, we will discover the story of the man behind history's greatest discovery. The sound of ship chains, once echoing in the Genoese harbor. The rustle of sails, ready to be lost in the unknown of the ocean. And the stubborn dream of a man who would change the world forever. Christopher Columbus, not just a sailor, but an epic soul who made the impossible possible, where determination and vision triumphed. Before we begin, don't forget to support us by liking the content and subscribing to the channel. Also, share your location and current time with us. Sometimes our stories can take you to the docks of 15th century Italy. Sometimes you can find yourself on the deck of a ship lost in Atlantic storms. Now let's dim the lights, open the window slightly for a light sea salt scent. And tonight, let's embark together on Columbus's legendary journey. In 1451, in the narrow streets of Genoa, embracing the blue waters of the Mediterranean, the cry of a child rose in the house of Domenico Colombo, working at the weaving loom, and his wife, Susanna. The child born was named Cristoforo. No one could know that day that this name would echo through the ages, cross oceans. Little Cristoforo's first memories were the sounds of the Genoese harbor, the clanking of ship chains, the flapping of sails in the wind, sailor shouts. The house window looked out onto the harbor, and Cristoforo would stand there for hours, watching the ships. A light shone in his eyes, wondering where those ships were going, what lay beyond the seas. His father tried to accustom him to the weaving business, but Cristoforo's hands seemed created to hold the helm rather than thread. Even when sitting at the weaving loom, his mind was at the harbor. He would listen to the wind direction, try to predict the weather. At 10 years old, he boarded a ship for the first time. Just a short tour in the harbor, but for Cristoforo, it was a magical moment. The ship's planks swaying under his feet, the salty wind blowing on his face, the blue stretching to infinity in the distance. At that moment, he understood his destiny was in the oceans. Genoa was a great maritime center at that time. The city, one of the important ports of Mediterranean trade, offered young Cristoforo a perfect school to learn the intricacies of seamanship. Walking through the streets, he constantly heard conversations in different languages, smelled exotic spices, saw goods from distant countries. At 14 years old, he went on his first real voyage. He started working on a small merchant ship in the Mediterranean. This was not just starting a job, but the moment his dreams began to come true. Standing on the ship's deck, looking at the horizon, he imagined what lay beyond that horizon. During his first voyage, they were caught in a storm. Cristoforo was scared, of course. He was a 14-year-old child. But at the same time, he was enchanted. The power of the waves, the fierce screams of the wind, the ship's struggle with the storm. Even in this chaos, there was an order, a rhythm, and he began to understand this rhythm. As years passed, his experience increased. He made voyages to the Barbary coasts, Corsica, Sardinia. Each voyage taught him new things: how to find direction by the stars, how to read wind patterns, how to understand the ship's behavior. In his 20s, he experienced a major accident. The ship sank off the Portuguese coast. He also fell into the water. After swimming for hours, he managed to reach the Lisbon coast. This accident changed his life. Now he was in Portugal, and Portugal was considered the center of the world in terms of seafaring at that time. While staying in Lisbon, the map in Cristoforo's mind began to expand. Portuguese sailors were discovering African coasts, searching for new routes. Making voyages to West Africa Madeira, the Azores, Cristoforo was realizing the world was much bigger than they knew. During this period, he married. His marriage to a noblewoman named Felipa Perestrello e Moniz brought him not only love, but also important connections. His father-in-law was an experienced sailor, and Cristoforo had the opportunity to study his maps and notes. Marriage also brought him social status. He was now considered one of a noble family, not an ordinary sailor. This situation would play an important role in reaching the supporters needed to realize his dreams. But the real big change was happening in his mind. He had read Marco Polo's book, Il Milione, studied Toscanelli's maps. In light of this information, he arrived at a great theory. China and India could be reached by heading west. At the foundation of this theory was simple logic. The world was round. Everyone knew this now. Then heading west instead of east should be a shorter route. But between his theory and practice were enormous oceans. Cristoforo was so determined about this that he was drawing maps, making calculations day and night. When his wife observed him during these studies, she saw the fire in his eyes. This was not just an idea, but an obsession. According to his calculations, Japan was only 3 to 4 weeks away from Europe's western coasts. This calculation was wrong. He was unaware of the American continent's existence. But thanks to this wrong calculation, he would dare to set out. First, he applied to Portuguese King John II. When he appeared before the king, he had maps, calculations, Marco Polo's book. He explained his plan with great passion. He told the king, "I will bring you gold, spices, and endless riches." But the Portuguese committee rejected his plan. They found it too risky. Also, the Portuguese were already progressing in the project of reaching India using the African route. Why should they take an unknown route? This rejection did not break Cristoforo. On the contrary, it made him more determined. If Portugal didn't want it, he would find other places. But first, he needed to strengthen his theory even more. He started working with his brother Bartolomeo. Bartolomeo was also a talented cartographer. The two of them studied ancient sources together, reviewed calculations. Every calculation showed Cristoforo was right, at least in their eyes. During this period, his wife Felipa died. This loss deeply affected Cristoforo. Now there was nothing tying him to Portugal. He decided to go to Spain to make a new start. In 1485, at 34 years old, he crossed to Spain with his son Diego. He took refuge at La Rábida monastery near Palos harbor. The priest Antonio de Marchena he met here became the first person to be interested in his plan. Marchena was an astronomer and mathematician. When he examined Cristoforo's calculations, he was impressed. This plan could work, he said, and he promised to help him establish connections with the Spanish court. But Spain would not be easy either. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were at that time at war with the Muslim emirate in Granada. The final stage of the Reconquista was happening. All resources were allocated to this war. Cristoforo waited for years. He tried to find acquaintances at court, looked for opportunities to explain his plan. These years of waiting were very difficult. His money was running out, his hopes were breaking. But he never gave up. Finally, in 1486, he found the opportunity to appear before Queen Isabella. This meeting in Córdoba was one of the turning points of Cristoforo's life. He explained his plan to Isabella with great passion. The queen was impressed, but did not make a decision immediately. She established a commission, wanted the plan examined. This commission consisted of famous scholars, sailors, and clergymen. Cristoforo had to defend his plan before them. The meetings lasted for months. Cristoforo repeated the same arguments each time. The world is smaller than thought. The western route is possible. Great riches await. But the committee members remained skeptical. The difficulties Cristoforo experienced during this wait were not only financial. People mocked him, called him the crazy Genoese. But he did not lose his faith. In 1490, the commission gave its decision. Plan rejected. Too risky, too costly, low chance of success. When Cristoforo heard this decision, his world collapsed. He had waited, hoped for years. Disappointed, he decided to leave Spain. He would go to France. Perhaps he would be better received there. But just as he was about to leave, a miracle happened. Luis de Santangel, the royal treasurer, went to Isabella. "Your Majesty, this opportunity should not be missed. If this man is right, Spain will gain the greatest profit in history," he said. Isabella was convinced. She wanted to give one more last chance. She called Cristoforo back. This time the conditions were different. The Granada War had ended. The economic situation had improved. In April of 1492 in Santa Fe, the historic agreement was signed. Isabella and Ferdinand announced they accepted Cristoforo's plan. He would be given the title Admiral of the Ocean, would be the governor of the lands he discovered. When the agreement was signed, Cristoforo was 41 years old. The project he had dreamed of for 20 years would finally come true. But now the real difficulty was beginning, organizing the voyage. He went to Palos Harbor. Here he found 3 ships, Santa Maria, Pinta, and Niña. The ships were not large, but would suffice for an ocean voyage. The real problem was finding crew. No one wanted to set sail to unknown waters. Cristoforo struggled for months, tried to persuade. Finally, he managed to gather a crew of 90 people. Most were young, adventure-seeking sailor candidates. On the morning of August 3rd, 1492, before sunrise, there was great activity in Palos Harbor. 3 ships were preparing to set sail. Christopher Columbus, now known by his Spanish name Cristobal Colon, stood on Santa Maria's deck, checking final preparations. The captains received the final briefing. Martin Alonso Pinzon would command Pinta, his brother Vicente Yañez. Pinzon would command Niña. The plan was simple. First, they would go to the Canary Islands, complete their final preparations there, then head west. With the first light of morning, the sails were raised. The ships slowly began to move away from the harbor. Christopher stood at the stern, watching Palos one last time. This could be farewell. No one knew whether they would return from this voyage. Arrival at the Canary Islands was easy. Familiar waters, known route. But the real test would begin here. They completed final preparations at Las Palmas. Food, drink, sail repair materials. On September 6th, 1492, perhaps history's most important voyage officially began. 3 ships left the Canary Islands and headed west. Behind them was the known world. Ahead of them was completely unknown. The first days were good. The weather was beautiful. The wind was favorable. Morale was high. The crew sang songs, told stories. Christopher was making calculations, checking the route. But as days passed, the situation began to change. There was no trace of land. Only blue, endless blue. Some sailors began to worry. Are we going in the wrong direction? Questions were coming. Christopher tried to calm them. According to my calculations, we are close. A little more patience, he said. But doubts had begun to grow inside him. What if he was wrong? On September 10th, the first serious crisis arose. Some of the crew said they wanted to turn back. "This is madness, leading us all to death," they were grumbling. Christopher acted harshly, showed his authority. Each passing day increased the tension. The crew did not trust the compass. The compass constantly showed west, but they were finding direction by the North Star. This difference frightened them. Christopher tried to explain this situation. There was something called magnetic deviation. The compass showed approximate, not exact direction. But the crew did not understand this explanation. On September 20th, hopeful signs began to be seen. Branches fallen in water, birds, clouds. These were indicators that land was near. Morale improved a bit, but land was not visible. Every day they said, "We'll see tomorrow." But when tomorrow came, there was still only water. This situation was driving the crew crazy. On September 25th, Pinzon shouted, "I saw land." Everyone got excited, but when they approached, it turned out to be just a pile of clouds. This false alarm badly damaged morale. At the beginning of October, the situation became critical. The crew openly began to rebel. "We must turn back, otherwise we will all die," they were saying. Christopher was having difficulty convincing them. "3 more days," Christopher said. "If we don't find land within 3 days, we'll turn back." This promise temporarily calmed the crew. But Christopher knew inside that this was his last chance. On the night of October 10th, Christopher was keeping watch on deck. He was looking at the stars, listening to the wind. According to his calculations, they were very close, but there was no sign. Perhaps he really was wrong. After midnight, in the first hours of October 12th, a voice rose from the Pinta ship. "Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land!" A sailor named Rodrigo de Triana had seen a dark shape in the moonlight. Christopher could not believe it. He took binoculars, looked in that direction. It really was there, a dark line, land. Cries of joy rose in all ships. Finally they had found it. They waited for morning. When day broke, a small island was seen before them. White sandy beaches, green trees, clear water. It was like a corner of paradise. Christopher put on boots, wore his finest clothes. He would hold an official ceremony when landing. He took the Spanish flag, the cross, the sword. Everything was ready. They approached the shore in a small boat. The moment Christopher's foot touched the ground, he fell to his knees. He kissed the cross, planted the Spanish flag. "I take these lands in the name of the Spanish Catholic monarchs," he said. He named the island San Salvador. This was one of today's Bahama Islands. But Christopher was not aware of this. In his mind, he was on the shores of Japan. Native people were on the shore. Copper-skinned, black-haired, gentle-looking people. They had no strange clothes. Some were completely naked. Christopher called them Indios, Indians. The natives were curious but friendly. Christopher gave them various gifts, beads, bells, colored hats. In return, they also gave parrot feathers, cotton thread. Christopher immediately looked for gold. He showed gold to the natives, tried to ask where it could be found. They tried to understand through sign language. The natives had small gold ornaments in their noses. They stayed in San Salvador for several days. Christopher devoted this time to getting to know the natives, exploring the region. But his goal was different. He was looking for gold riches. The natives pointed out there was more gold on other islands. Christopher immediately decided to go there. He also took 6 natives with him. They would serve as guides. On October 14th, they arrived at the second island. He named this Santa Maria de la Concepcion. But here too he did not find much gold. The natives again pointed to other places. Thus they continued traveling island to island. Fernandina, Isabela, Juana, Cuba. He gave Christian names to each island, but he could not find the great gold reserves he was looking for. When he arrived at Cuba, he was very excited. This island was large. Perhaps this was Kipangu, Japan, that Marco Polo mentioned. He continued exploring along the coast. He found a very beautiful harbor in Cuba. He named this Puerto Santo. The natives here were also friendly. He saw them smoking tobacco. This was a completely new experience for Europeans. In November, he discovered another large island, Hispaniola, today's Haiti and Dominican Republic. This island looked very rich. He thought there might be gold in its rivers. He encountered the first serious problem in Hispaniola. On Christmas night, the Santa Maria ship hit rocks and sank. The captain and crew were saved, but the ship was lost. This accident turned into an unexpected opportunity. Christopher used the sunken ship's materials to establish the first colony. He left a group of 39 people and founded La Navidad 4. Now it was time to return. He needed to bring the good news to Spain. On January 4th, 1493, he left Hispaniola. He set out with 2 ships and selected crew. The return voyage was not as difficult as going. The route was previously known. Winds were favorable. But they still faced various difficulties. Storms, diseases, food shortages. In February, they arrived at the Azores. Now they were in known waters. Christopher wrote a letter, explained his discoveries. This letter would be the first news to reach Europe. On March 15th, 1493, they returned to Palace Harbor. The voyage, lasting 7 months and 12 days, had ended. A large crowd gathered at the harbor. Christopher was greeted as a hero. The natives he brought with him, parrots, exotic plants, aroused great interest. People flocked to see these strange creatures. Christopher was giving them information about India. In Barcelona, he appeared before Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. He presented the gifts he brought, explained his discoveries. He showed gold samples, talked about spice trees. The royal couple was very pleased. They honored Christopher with the title Don. The promises made were kept. He became Admiral of the Ocean, was declared governor of the lands he discovered. With the excitement of success, he began planning the second voyage. This time, a much larger fleet was prepared. 17 ships, 1,200 people. The aim was to establish permanent colonies. On September 25th, 1493, he set out on the second voyage. This time, the route was more southern. He found new islands: Dominica, Guadeloupe, Antigua, Puerto Rico. Each was named with Christian names. When he returned to Hispaniola, he was met with bad news. All 39 people he left had died. Conflict had broken out with the natives. The fort had been destroyed. The first colonization attempt had ended in failure. He established a new fort, Isabella, this time larger, stronger. But problems started here too. Diseases, food shortages, conflicts with natives. Christopher's talents as an administrator were limited. He was excellent as a sailor, but failing at colony management. The colonists began to complain about him. In 1496, he returned to Spain. This time, the reception was colder. The expected gold riches had not come. The king and queen were disappointed. Christopher tried to convince. There are great riches, just need a little more time, he was saying. But his credibility had decreased. Other explorers were also making discoveries. 2 years later, he was allowed to go on the third voyage. But this time, the conditions were different. Fewer ships, fewer men, fewer resources. On May 30th, 1498, he set out with 6 ships. This time, he would go south. He found Trinidad Island, then reached Venezuelan coasts. This was the first time he set foot on mainland territory. But he was not aware of this discovery. He thought that place was also an island. The fresh water brought by the Orinoco River had surprised him. Such a large river can only come from a continent, he thought, but could not reach a conclusion. When he returned to Hispaniola, the situation was terrible. The colony was in civil war. Spanish colonists were fighting with each other. With natives, order was completely broken. Christopher tried to control the situation, but it was too late. Complaints were pouring into Spain from colonists. Christopher Columbus is a bad administrator, unjust, merciless. They were sending letters. These complaints were being carefully evaluated at the royal court. In 1500, a special commissioner named Francisco de Bobadilla was sent to Hispaniola. His duty was to investigate the situation, intervene if necessary. When Bobadilla arrived on the island, he was met with a terrible sight. Spanish colonists were hanging on gallows. Christopher's brother Diego was issuing execution orders. Native rebellions were constantly breaking out. Massacres were being done in response. The colony had become hell. Bobadilla immediately intervened. He had Christopher and his brothers arrested, put in chains. This was the most humiliating moment of the man's life. Christopher, once a hero, was now being treated as a criminal. He was sent to Spain in chains. The ship captain wanted to remove the chains, but Christopher refused. "These chains will be my medal," he said. He was trying to turn his pain into pride. When he arrived in Spain, the situation improved somewhat. Queen Isabella still trusted him. The chains were removed, he regained his freedom. But he was no longer the same. An aged, tired, broken man. Christopher asked for one more last chance. 4th and final voyage. This time his goal was different. He would try to find the land passage to China and India. He still did not believe in the existence of a continent as large as an ocean. On May 11th, 1502, he set out on his last voyage. This time his son Fernando was also with him. The aged captain was embarking on his last adventure. 4 small ships, 150 crew. This voyage was the most difficult. He discovered the coasts of Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. He looked for gold everywhere, but could not find large reserves. The ships were rotting. Crew were catching diseases. He tried to trade with natives in Panama. They wore gold ornaments, so large reserves must be nearby. But the natives were aggressive. Trade was difficult. Various conflicts occurred. Because the ships rotted, they were stranded in Jamaica. They had to wait on the island for a year. Christopher was ill. His strength was exhausted. This was the most difficult period he experienced. Some of the crew rebelled. "We're going to die because of this old man," they were saying. Christopher had lost his authority. Only a few loyal men remained with him. Finally, the rescue ship came. They returned to Spain in 1504. Christopher was exhausted, sick, unhappy. Queen Isabella was also ill, unable to help him. After returning to Spain, Christopher was forgotten. New explorers had emerged: Vasco da Gama, Amerigo Vespucci, Balboa. Their discoveries were more brilliant, more profitable. Christopher continued drawing maps in his withdrawn home. He was still thinking about how to reach China, planning new routes. But no one was listening to him anymore. In his last years, he complained of injustice. "I discovered the new world, but was not given my due," he was saying. He constantly told those close to him he had been wronged. On May 20th, 1506, at 54 years old, he died in Valladolid. His death was simple. There was no magnificent funeral. Only his family and a few close friends attended his funeral. When he died, he still believed the New World was Asia. He never accepted that America was a separate continent. This stubbornness was the characteristic that made him both great and tragic. His body was first buried in Valladolid, then in Seville. In 1540 it was moved to Santo Domingo, Hispaniola, according to his son Diego's will. It was moved several more times in subsequent centuries. Today, where his grave is located, is not even certain. Seville or Santo Domingo. This uncertainty seems like the last example of his tragic fate. Christopher's real tragedy was living at the wrong time. If he had been born too early, he could not have made the discovery. If born too late, someone else would have done it. He was there at exactly that critical moment. His greatest achievement was courage. When everyone said impossible, he said possible. When everyone said madness, he said vision. This courage changed the world. But at the same time, he was a tragic figure. He could not become an administrator, could not become rich, could not become happy. He discovered the world, but could not find himself. In the modern world, Christopher Columbus is controversial. Some see him as a hero, some as an invader. Both views have truth. He was a complex character. Christopher Columbus was not just an explorer. He was a symbol of humanity, showing the courage to meet the unknown, trying the impossible, following his dreams. And this symbolic value continued to live after his death.